Hello Pythonistas. Last time the hdlogger, and it basically consists of a module with one function called log, which prints messages to the terminal to stand it out. And there's a little bit of extra information in there about the names of the log levels and the sort of threshold log level up to which we want to actually print our messages and from which on we want to suppress the messages. So this time we're going to put part of the code into a class. Why would we want to do that? Well, first of all, logging is a distinct idea from whatever other code we are using this module in. And so it's a good idea to put something that is a distinct idea into a class. Not always, but a lot of times. Also, we want to expand our module or our logger and put several more features in there over the time. So it's going to get a little bit messy, and we want to keep namespaces clean. Could use one logger to write to a log file, one to print on the screen, and a third one to print out results or print results to or write results to a separate file. So making it a class gives us a lot of possibilities that we can use later on. So let's dive into the code. We're going to start with the code as it was as we left it last time. And so here's the log levels, here's the names of the log levels. This is sort of the threshold log level up from which on we want to print something. So if it's warning, which is the default, it will print warnings and errors. Then we have the function log, and we have a short test. So first of all, we have to think about what we want to put into a class. The names or the names of the log levels and the numbers that we internally use for the log levels are not part of the class, actually, should not be part of the logger itself, of an instance of the logger, for example, because it's sort of a general thing that's module-wide important, so it still is part of the logging mechanism, but not of the instance of a logger later on. So we're going to leave those first 5 lines here. I'm just going to call it logger, and I'm going to adjust the parameter list, but we have to probably have to change some parts inside the method. Namely, whenever we use something that's defined as an instance variable or as a method, we need to use self dot in front of it. So we have to think about, do we want to have log level as a class method, which would be the same value then for all the instances of the class, or do we want to have it as an instance variable? Did I say method before? I meant class variable and now instance variable, which we would need to define inside an init function, and then it could be different in all the different instances. So obviously we want to have it different. We want to, one of the reasons why we're using a class or why we're making this a class is because we want to be able to configure the individual instances differently. So we're going to make log level an instance variable. So the way to do this is we're going to define the init function. we must not forget self, and then we will make an optional parameter called level, with which we can configure the instance of the logger to a different log level, or log level threshold. So we are making this warning here, colon. Then we need an indentation. So now this is going to be an instance variable, self.logLevel, and it's not going to be warning, but it's going to be a level. Okay, so now we made log level an instance variable. So now we have to put a self dot every inside another method. So that's that. Level is okay, message is okay. So now the class looks okay. The test. So now what I would do I was writing this for actual usage later on. I would actually, maybe before I did the and put it into a Git repository, even if it's only local, so that if I mess up the class implementation, or if I'm not happy with the class implementation later on, I can easily just like revert my changes and go back to the function, to the version that I'm happy with. Now is a good time to do that as well. With this class. Okay. .log there's no attribute log, sorry. No, of course not hdlogger, but just logger. Log is now a function of the instance, or method of the instance of logger, not of the module hdlogger. My bad. Okay, so this works, but it doesn't. I call the function log, the method log is and yeah, so there's a lot of writing involved here, and it would be nice to have the functionality to only write log or to only use the function log as we did before. So how would we do this? So I think the best way to do this is to generate a default logger instance in the module so that the user can use that without actively having to instantiate from the class logger, capital L. Do the same stuff again, but it's going to call our default instance, our default logger.log, and then just pass I'm going to give it the level arrow so it appears error like this, hello log or hello, yeah, whatever. And okay, the hello log. So this works. The module, so I will hdlogger, and then I would type hdlogger.log hello and give it a high priority, a high log level, so that it's actually printed. Okay, what I could of course do is I could do from hdlogger import log. Now there's two problems with this, and the first problem is that log is also defined in NumPy and in Math, at least those two ones that I know of, as the natural logarithm. So if you happen to use those logarithmic functions from NumPy or from Math, you run into problems because you cannot have log and the logging, the hdlogger log and the math log at the same time if you do it like this. So if you would now type from math import log, and then this is the logarithm. So this is called namespace pollution, and it's generally a good idea to just import modules and then write the module name dot function name or class name or whatever to avoid this kind of stuff. Something that you can do if you want to not type out hdlogger every time is you can do something like from hdlogger import log as, for example, hdlog, and now you have a function, you still have the log, which is the logarithmic function from math as we imported a few lines above, but we also have hdlog hello hdlogger dot warning, and we also have the logging function from our hdlogger. So this is just one way to avoid this. We could of course use different versions of this. We could, for example, call avoid the name log in our logger use log with a double G or use hdlog to start with, or use not implement this function but only use functions called debug, info, warning, and error as the logging, the built-in module logging from Python does, and yeah, not have the function log in it. So anyhow, we are going to implement these functions as just as convenience functions as well. So there are, if you know the so anyway, we're going to implement those functions debug, info, warning, and error as convenience functions. And the ones of you who have used the Python module logging already know these, or are used to write it like this. So we're going to do def debug, yeah, only message, because we already know the level. The level is going to be debug in this case. And then we're going to call again, we can call our function log with the message, and level equals debug. We of course could also directly call default logger.log with message and level debug. And we're going to do the same thing for one more, for the info warning and error. Okay, and now we have a bunch of convenience functions. Debug. Hello, we already have hello debug, hello convenience debug. So there's a quote missing. Info, hello convenience info, and warning. Hello warning, convenience warning, and error. So this already looks like what we're used to from the built-in module logging. Hello convenience error. Let's see if this works. Works fine. Now, one thing that we cannot easily do is to change the log level or the log level threshold of the default logger. Of course, if we know, and with we now I mean somebody who uses this module, if that person knows that our default logger is called default_logger, then they can set the log level as an instance variable of the default logger. But I like to think of default logger in the name of default logger like an implementation detail, and the user, the end user, so to speak, should not be concerned with implementation details. So they should not have to use the name default logger to access only the log level. So what we're going to do is we're going to implement one more convenience function, which is called def set log level, which is going to set the log level of our default logger. And there's going to be a level, of course, and it's going to access the default logger log level. Is that without an underscore? Yes. And it's going to set it to whatever level is. Okay, so now we can access the log level easily by using set. Okay, so now for some reason the camera stopped recording, but the screen recording was still on, so I'm going to walk you through the rest of what I was doing on screen, but you're not going to hear any clicking sounds while I'm typing, because that's recorded, or was supposed to be recorded on the camera and is not. So with the set log level convenience function, we can very easily set the log level of the default logger without having to know the name of the default logger, which is a nice thing because it's something that we just used in the implementation for ourselves, and the user of the module should not be concerned with that. So now we can set the log level to debug, and we get all the output from all the convenience functions: debug, info, warning, and error. Okay, so now what have we done? We have defined a class, and within this class we have defined the function log and the instance variable log level, the threshold log level for that logger. And we have defined a couple of convenience functions which are very useful. We did have to write some extra code, so there is some overhead. There's the class, there's the definition of init, there's the usage of self wherever it is needed. So there is a little bit of extra typing and taking care of doing all those pieces and bits and typing those where they have to go. But the good thing is now what we have gained is that we can define different loggers. We can define several loggers in the same program and configure them differently. Right now, the only configuration that we can do is different log levels, but at some point, maybe in the next video, we're going to implement writing to files so that we can configure one logger to write to one file, another logger to write to another file, and a third logger to write to standard out, the terminal. So what I'm showing you here now is that we can just import logger from hdlogger. I still have to import hdlogger in order to get the log levels. Well, I could type from hdlogger import logger, comma, debug, comma, warning, comma, info, whatever I need. But for now, I will only want to show you the different configurations of different loggers. So I'm defining logger 1, logger 2 with the debug levels or debug thresholds, log levels, debug and warning respectively. And if I'm printing hello with logger 1, it will print because the threshold log level is set to debug. So info, the default log level for the message, is info and will print. It will not print for logger 2 because I configured it to go with warning, to only print warnings and errors, which is actually the default. So I didn't even need to write it there, but I thought it would be a good idea to write it explicitly. So that's it for today. Next time, as I said, we're going to implement writing to files so that having the class and making different instances makes a little bit more sense. I hope you enjoyed this coding session. If you did, please do all the fancy stuff with the colorful buttons that you find below this video. And until next time, keep on coding.